The first thing Tess Ryder ever said to me was, "How fast can two people rebuild 40 feet of fence?" It was 7 on a Saturday morning. She had a hammer in one hand, and a man with a camera was parked at the end of our street. I'd lived next to her for 8 months by then, long enough to know her porch light schedule and her kids' laugh, not long enough to know her coffee order. And in 8 months she had never once asked me for anything, including, memorably, the time I watched her carry a dresser up her front steps alone out of what I can only describe as spite. So when she flagged me down over the sagging pickets between our yards, voice casual and knuckles white, I didn't ask why. I went and got my tools, because I teach shop for a living, and a person asking for help like it's costing them blood is a person you help first and question later. We worked an hour before she answered the question I hadn't asked. She did it without stopping, setting a post like she was setting a bone. "There's a man," she said, "who has been photographing my backyard. That gray sedan, corner of Maple. Don't look. He's been there since Tuesday. He photographs the broken fence and my son playing behind the broken fence and the road on the other side of the broken fence. And on Thursday, a woman from the court is coming to walk through my house and decide whether it's a safe place for a 7-year-old. She drove the post true with 2 strokes. So, how fast can two people rebuild 40 feet of fence? By Wednesday, I said, if you don't mind my music. Something in her shoulders came down half an inch. The first half inch, I'd learn, of a very long way. And that afternoon, when the posts were set and the lemonade came out, she looked at me for a second, like she was checking a measurement twice. And then she said the sentence that rearranged the rest of my life. "There's someone I want you to meet." The someone came out the back door carrying a spiral notebook and a pair of binoculars nearly as big as his head, walked straight up to me and shook my hand like a bank manager. "Oscar," he said, 2 questions. 1. Do you know what a pileated woodpecker sounds like? 2. Do you have a criminal record? Mom says I can't ask that one. He clicked his pen. I asked it. I passed the interview provisionally, pending, I was informed, further observation, and over sandwiches on the porch steps, with Oscar ranging the yard with his binoculars, Tess laid the whole thing out flat and fast, the way nurses deliver bad vitals. Her husband, Daniel, had died 19 months ago. Ice on Route 9. A Tuesday, no drama to it, just gone. And 12 days ago, Daniel's parents, Gerald and Bibi Ash, of Ash Materials, the concrete company whose name is stamped into half the sidewalks in this county, had served her with a petition. Grandparent visitation, escalating on page 4 into a request for custody. The filing called her home environment unstable and hazardous. It cited her night shifts in the ER. It cited 2 moves in 2 years, which is what happens when your husband dies and the money changes shape. It cited, and here her voice went carefully, dangerously level, a prior child welfare contact, meaning the day of Daniel's funeral, when 5-year-old Oscar slipped a church full of grieving adults and was found 11 minutes later at the duck pond, and some cousin of Gerald's called it in. And the case was opened, investigated, and closed as unfounded inside a month. They'd exhumed it anyway. Page 6. They barely visited when Daniel was alive, she said. He was estranged from them, wouldn't tell me all of why, and I stopped pushing. Then he dies, and 18 months of silence, and suddenly they want my son so badly they've hired. She tipped her chin, without looking, toward the corner of Maple that the mail truck came while she was talking, which is the kind of timing that would feel heavy-handed if it hadn't actually happened. Certified envelope, their exhibit list. And there, tabbed and numbered like museum pieces, photographs of her own backyard. The leaning fence with the road beyond it. Oscar, alone on the swing set, telephoto flattened, time-stamped. Her shift schedule, which meant someone had gotten it, which meant someone at the hospital had given it. I was still processing that when Oscar materialized at my elbow the way 7-year-olds do, opened the spiral notebook, and turned it around for me to see. Bird log, dates, times, species, sketches, meticulous, obsessive, wonderful, and salted in among the chickadees and the juncos in the same careful pencil, gray car. 8:40 a.m., man with the big lens, again, gray car. 8:40, he thinks I can't see him. I have binoculars, gray car. 3:10 p.m., not a bird. 9 entries. The earliest was dated more than 5 weeks back. Oscar, I said carefully, when did the gray car start coming? Before school ended, he said, matter of fact, scanning the tree line. The gray car is not a bird. But I log everything that watches. Tess took the notebook from my hands and read the dates, and I watched her do the arithmetic I had just done. 5 weeks of surveillance, 12 days of lawsuit. They hadn't filed the petition and then investigated her. They'd built the file first, photographed the broken fence, harvested the schedule, staged the concern, and filed when the album was full. Wednesday, she said quietly, handing the notebook back to her son like it was made of glass. You said the fence by Wednesday. Tuesday, I said. We beat Tuesday. And somewhere in those 4 days of post-hole diggers and rails and Oscar solemnly supervising with a clipboard he'd made himself, the job stopped being a fence. I fixed the latch on the side gate because latches matter to court evaluators. I swapped the batteries in every smoke detector and left the receipts on the counter. Dated because Tess was building a paper house around her real one, and I know how to frame. I built Oscar a bird blind in the maple. A proper one, a shop teacher's one, with a rail and a roof and a little weatherproof camera aimed at the feeder because he'd read that the great crested flycatcher was statistically possible in our county, and he intended to have proof. He named the blind Fort Audubon. He granted me a lifetime membership. There are honors I have that mean less. Thursday came, and with it Miss Adeyemi, the guardian ad litem. A compact, unhurried woman with a legal pad and the eyes of someone who has been lied to by professionals. She walked the yard. She tested the new fence with one hand, the way you'd check a handshake. She sat with Oscar, who explained the difference between a downy and a hairy woodpecker at merciful length, and showed her Fort Audubon, and before Tess could gracefully manage the notebook out of frame, showed her the gray car pages too. Miss Adeyemi read them for a long moment. She wrote something down. Mrs. Ryder, she said at the door, neutral as a scale. The petitioner's filing mentions an incident at a pond. It also mentions the pause was surgical, an unrelated adult male spending significant unsupervised time with the child. Her eyes came to me, mild and total. You'd be the fence. I'd be the fence, I said. She wrote that down too, and left, and gave us nothing, which Dom would later tell me is what a good one looks like. That night the other front opened. Bibi Ishi's public Instagram, 3,000 local followers, charity boards, the Historical Society, posted a professional photograph of her and Gerald on their veranda holding a framed picture of Oscar as a baby. The caption ran 4 paragraphs. It used the words, praying, heartbroken, a grandmother's love, and we only want what's best. And it did not use Tess's name, and it didn't have to. By morning it had 400 comments, and the casserole ladies at St. Brigid's had stopped meeting Tess's eyes. She read it standing at my workbench, where she'd taken to standing, and handed the phone back with a steadiness that cost more than shouting. They're not praying, she said. They're campaigning. And then, because Tess Ryder is a triage nurse, and triage nurses hunt bleeds, she went and found the leak. The shift schedule in their exhibit list hadn't fallen off a truck. Somebody had handed it over, and she walked into hospital HR on her day off and asked, flatly, who. It took the records office 40 minutes to find it. An employment verification request, 2 months old, from a paralegal at a firm nobody had heard of, claiming to represent a mortgage lender processing Tess's refinance. Tess has never refinanced anything. The fax cover sheet was still in the file, and the callback number on it, when Dom ran it later, billed to an Investigations LLC, whose registered agent was 1D Denton. Pretexting, Dom would call it, with the happy face of a woman labeling an exhibit, obtaining employment records under a false identity. The hospital's compliance officer, who does not enjoy being lied to on letterhead, wrote it up, sealed it, and handed Tess a copy with the institutional equivalent of a war blessing. They reached into my workplace, Tess said that night at my bench, turning the fax copy over in her hands like a splinter she'd finally pulled. 2 months ago. Before the petition, before the pawned nonsense, before any judge saw one word of anything, Eli, they didn't build a case. They built a net. They came for me the following week, which Dom says is how you know you matter to a case. First, the school district. My principal, Marcy, called me in on a Tuesday in July, which is never good, and slid a printout across her desk with 2 fingers like it smelled. An anonymous complaint, filed through the district portal, concerned community members questioning the judgment and boundaries of a teacher inserting himself into a custody matter involving a minor male child. Every word of it engineered to be unactionable and unforgettable. Nothing alleged, everything implied. The kind of sentence that follows a male teacher around for a career. I have to log it, Marcy said. I logged it. I also logged that you've taught here 11 years without so much as a parking complaint, and that this arrived, mysteriously, the same month you started helping a woman the Ashy family is suing. She looked at me over her glasses. Eli, whatever you're standing next to over there, plant your feet or step away. The middle gets people hurt. Second, the gray car got a face. He caught me in the parking lot of the hardware store, of all places. 40 pounds of manila folder under one arm, 50-ish, golf shirt, the bland friendliness of a man who repossesses things. Denton, he said. Private licensed investigator, he said. He was authorized, he said, to resolve an awkwardness. The folder had photographs of me and Oscar in the bird blind, me and Oscar at the lumber yard, me handing Tessa coffee over the new fence, shot long, compressed, framed to look like whatever you needed it to look like. And under the photographs, a document with a signature line, confidentiality and no contact agreement. In consideration of $25,000, Eli Booker agrees to cease all contact with the minor child and the respondent, and to make no statements regarding. I stopped reading there, mostly to keep my hands polite. You should know, Denton said, not unkindly, families like this don't lose. They budget. You're a line item, teacher. Be a paid one. I took the folder. I did not sign the folder. I drove it straight to Tess's kitchen table and laid it out. Every photo, every page. Because she'd been handed 19 months of people managing what she knew, and I was not going to be one more. She went through it in silence. At the offer page she stopped and read it twice, and when she looked up I braced for the wrong thing. For doubt, for the question of what I'd do with a number like that against a teacher's salary. $25,000, she said, to disappear. Apparently that's the going rate. What did it cost them? She said, and there was something new in her voice, something with an edge on it. A very good exhibit, I said, and for the first time since the certified mail started coming. Tess Ryder smiled like the fight had two sides. The exhibit went to Dominic Carter. Dom, who took my shop class in 2009, built a birdhouse with a shingled roof I still use as an example, and now practices family law above the credit union with a diploma on one wall and, I am proud to report, that birdhouse on the other. She read the no-contact agreement the way some people read dessert menus. They put it in writing, she said. Reverend. A cash offer to strip the child support system. On paper. During active litigation. Gerald's counsel is good, which means Gerald went around his counsel, which means Gerald is not calm. She squared the folder. People who aren't calm are hiding a clock. Let's go find out what it's counting down to. Before she found it, the other Ashe made her move. The soft one, which turned out to be the one that left a mark. Saturday, farmer's market. The one outing Tess had refused to give up because Oscar rates the honeyman among his top 4 humans. Bibi Ashe was simply there, by the peaches, silver bob and linen, and a gift bag with tissue paper. And she folded down to Oscar's height with tears already professionally underway. Oscar, sweetheart, do you remember your Bibi? While 20 feet back, a young man with a very good camera pretended to photograph Produce. The whole thing was blocked like theater, because it was theater, grandmother, wronged, reaching, mother, cold, about to be photographed, refusing. Tess didn't refuse. She stepped in beside her son, put a hand on his shoulder, smiled for the long lens, and said, pleasantly, at a volume calibrated for exactly one listener, "You don't get candid moments, Bibi. You scheduled this one. He's 7, and he logs everything. Ask your investigator how that's going." And then, softer, the only sentence of the whole war she ever aimed at Bibi Ashe alone. "When you're ready to see him without a camera behind you, write to me yourself. Not your lawyer." You. Bibi's face did something complicated there among the peaches. The theater flickering. One honest second showing through. Then her driver appeared, and it closed again. Oscar accepted the gift bag with grave courtesy, waited until the town car turned the corner, and handed it up to his mother unopened. "The bag is heavier than a present for a kid I used to be," he reported. It was. Inside, wrapped in tissue like a toy, was a leather photo album. Daniel at 7, gap-toothed, holding a fishing rod, and no note. Tess sat down right there on the market curb and looked at her husband's face at her son's age for a long minute, and I stood the kind of guard where you watch the street and not the crying. File it under boring, but important? Oscar asked, careful. "No, baby." She closed the album gently. "This one's important, but complicated." Different drawer. Dom found the clock in the probate file. Because Dom bills by the hour and reads like it. She called us in on a Friday with the conference table already dealt. Daniel's estate filing, public record, a certified copy of a trust instrument older than any of us, and a page from a construction trade weekly, flagged in pink. She let Tess read the trust document herself. I watched Tess's face move through it. Confusion, then stillness, then a kind of slow-motion cave-in. "There are shares," Tess said. Daniel had, "There are shares." 30% of Ash Materials, Dom said. Left to Daniel by his grandfather, skipping Gerald entirely, which I find eloquent. And on Daniel's death, passing per the trust not to you, Tess, to Oscar. Held in trust until he's 25. She set one finger on the petition, on page 4. On a line of boilerplate, everyone's eyes had slid across. Guardianship of the person and estate of the minor child. The person and the estate. They don't need to raise your son to control his inheritance. They need a court to hand them the estate. The custody fight is the delivery vehicle. He never told me. Tess's voice had gone somewhere quiet and far. 19 years together and he never. We ate store brand everything our first winter, Eli. He was sitting on 30% of a concrete empire, and he never said one word. Then the question isn't the shares, I said. The question is what made a man hide an inheritance from his own wife, like it was radioactive. Dom slid the pink-flagged trade article across. Martin Group acquisition of Ashe Materials advances. Shareholder vote set for the 30th. And below the fold, one sentence doing an enormous amount of quiet work. The sale was contested inside the family, with Gerald Ashe's faction opposing, and the outcome expected to be decided by a narrow margin of voting shares. 30% is not a narrow margin, Dom said. 30% is the whole ball game. Whoever controls Oscar's trust controls whether that company gets sold, and Gerald is burning money and grandchildren to make sure it's him. She capped her pen. The vote is the 30th. Everything they do between now and then, read it against that date. Tess sat back. On the table between us, in the exhibit stack, was the telephoto shot of her son on his swing set. She turned it face down, gently, like closing a door on a sleeping kid. They don't want my son, she said. They want his 30%. The emergency motion landed 8 days later, and they built it out of the worst 90 minutes of our summer. It was a Thursday. Oscar walked out of day camp pickup line and did not walk into it again. 1 minute he was at the fence with his backpack. The next, gone. And for 90 minutes, the world came off its axle. The camp called Tess. Tess called me from the car with a voice I never want to hear again. The camp called the police because that's protocol. And a cruiser was in her driveway when Oscar was found, where I should have looked first, where I did look second, up the maple, in Fort Audubon, knees to his chest, binoculars around his neck, logbook open. The gray car was at camp, he said, before anyone could speak. Not crying. Worse, precise, it's not supposed to be at camp. That's a new location. I know the protocol for strangers, but there's no protocol for the gray car, so I executed the bird protocol. He looked at his mother, and his chin went, just once. When something big is watching, you go still in the blind. You told Mr. Denning at camp where I'm allowed to walk to. I walked there. I logged the time. He had. 3:12. Left camp. Gray car at camp. New. The kid had followed his own emergency plan to the letter, straight to the one place on earth he felt unwatched. And he'd been sitting in a fort I built him, being brave in the only grammar he had, while a police report got a case number. 26 hours later, 26, the Ashes Council filed an emergency motion for temporary custody. Minor child eloped from supervised care, whereabouts unknown to mother for approximately 90 minutes. Law enforcement involvement. Pattern of inadequate supervision. Attached, the pond, again, the old fence photos, again, a hearing date, stamped in real, a week from Friday, 9 a.m. Tess read it on her porch at dusk with both hands, and then she set it down and put her face in her hands, and I sat next to her on the step and did not say one single useless thing. 9 days, she finally said. They spooked him, Eli. Their own man spooked him out of that pickup line. And now they're going to stand in front of a judge and call my son's fear my failure, and they have 4 lawyers, and I have a nurse's salary, and a birdhouse attorney, and you. That's not nothing, I said. No. She looked at me then, tired all the way down, and something else underneath the tired, and for a moment the porch got very small. It's very much not nothing, which is its own problem, because I can't tell anymore if I'm. She stopped, rebuilt the sentence, Eli. You cannot be the thing I grab because I'm drowning. You deserve better than being driftwood. Then I'll be the fence, I said. Fences wait. She breathed out something that was almost a laugh and almost wasn't, and leaned her shoulder against mine, 1 inch, the whole distance. 9 days, she said to the yard. 9 days, I said to the yard. Let's go wake up your lawyer. Dom's war room was her conference table, and by Sunday it held everything we had, which was more than they thought, and less than we needed. And then Tess went into her own garage for the folding chairs, and came back instead carrying the things she'd been walking past for 19 months. Daniel's gang box, job site steel, scuffed orange, padlocked, sitting under a moving blanket since the week of the funeral, because she could not make herself open a dead man's toolbox and smell his work. She set it on the conference table like a casket. And Oscar, who has a key ring, because of course he does, produced the padlock key from the mudroom hook labeled Dad in his own printing. And nobody in that room breathed quite right for a minute. Inside, on top of the trowels and the chalk lines, was a document wallet, zipped, waterproof, deliberate. And on the folder inside it, in Daniel's blunt carpenter pencil capitals, one sentence. If they ever come for what's mine, this is why. He'd known. 19 months dead, and he'd left a hand raised in the dark for exactly this moment. The folder held the answer to every question Tess had stopped asking. Quality control reports from Ash Materials, batch tests for a 2016 municipal job, the Riverbend pedestrian bridge, the one with the plaque, the one 4,000 people cross every fair weekend. 2 versions of the same brake test results. The originals, initialed by the testing lab, with numbers that failed spec, and the versions filed with the county, retyped, massaged, passing, over a signature line that read Daniel Ash, QC Supervisor, except the signature wasn't Daniel's, because Daniel had refused to sign. And stapled behind everything was his resignation memo, dated the same week, addressed to his father, 4 sentences long. And the last one read, "You can have the company. Dad, I'm keeping my name." That was the estrangement. Not a feud. A firewall. He'd walked away from 30% of an empire rather than initial a lie, hidden the shares from his own wife so the money could never reach back into their house, and left the proof in a toolbox with a note. Because he knew his father, and he knew that someday, somehow, Gerald would come for what was his. The Marden acquisition, Dom said softly, working it through. Due diligence. A buyer's engineers crawl every municipal filing, every batch record. If the company sells, Riverbend surfaces. Liability, maybe criminal referral. Unless, she looked up, unless one man controls enough shares to kill the sale and keep the books closed forever. 30%, held by a 7-year-old, guarded only by an ER nurse he can litigate into the ground. She sat back. It was never custody. It was never even money. It's burial. He needs your son's shares to bury what your husband wouldn't sign. Tess stood at the table, with her hand flat on the folder, on Daniel's block capitals, for a long time. When she spoke, it wasn't to us. 19 months I was angry at you for the secret, she said. You weren't keeping it from me. You were standing between it and us. She pressed once, like a pulse check. Okay, Daniel, okay, finishing your sentence now. The counterattack assembled itself over 4 days, piece by piece, and the strange grace of it was how much of it had been built before we knew we were building it. Oscar's logbook, 5 weeks of gray car entries predating the petition, went in as surveillance of a minor, pattern and practice. The written buy-off with my name on it went in as what Dom called, with relish, consciousness of a weak case. The probate file, the trust, and the pink-flagged trade article went in as motive, cross-referenced to the vote on the 30th. And then, on Tuesday night, Ford Audubon testified. Because the feeder camera, the cheap weatherproof one I'd aimed at a suet cage so a 7-year-old could document a statistically possible flycatcher, had been running the whole time. It had 91 minutes of the emergency. Oscar climbing into the blind at 3:19, calm and methodical, opening his log, sitting still, exactly as trained, the entire time the petition would later call whereabouts unknown. And in the top corner of frame 2 at 3:02 p.m., 17 minutes earlier and 2 blocks from a Children's Day camp where it had no business existing, the gray sedan, plate legible, rolling slow, their emergency, on video, caused by their own surveillance. The motion didn't just collapse, It reversed polarity. The Ashes felt the floor move, because Wednesday at noon their counsel sent the offer, and I will give Gerald this. It was smart, and it was aimed exactly at the crack in Tess. Petitioners will withdraw all pending motions and petitions, with prejudice, waiving all future custody and visitation claims, in exchange for respondent's stipulation, appointing Gerald Ashe sole guardian of the minor's estate. The child remains entirely with his mother. This offer expires 5 p.m. Wednesday. Keep your son. Hand over the shares you never knew existed. Done by dinner. Take it, Tess said, before Dom finished reading it aloud. Then, to our faces, you didn't hear him not come home for 90 minutes. I did. I don't want their company. I never wanted their money. I want a judge nowhere near my kid ever again. It's paper, Eli. It's 30% of concrete. He is 100% of everything. The room went quiet. It was Dom who started to answer, lawyer careful. And it was Oscar, cross-legged under the conference table, where he had been the entire time, because he is always where you least account for him, who finished it. He climbed out with the logbook under his arm and put his father's folder on the table in front of his mother, block capitals up. Mom, Dad's folder says this is why. He tapped the words. Once, precise. You always make me finish my sentences. Tess looked at her son. She looked at her husband's handwriting. Outside Dom's window, 4,000 people's worth of weekends crossed a bridge with a plaque on it. He didn't sign, she said finally. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Neither will I. Dom picked up the offer, read it once more, and smiled the birdhouse builder's smile I remembered from 2009, the one that meant the joints were about to be tight. Then let's answer them in exhibits. Friday, 8:15 a.m., the Ashes lawyers got our amended exhibit list, and by 8:40 the marble hallway outside courtroom 4 had rearranged itself around a whispered conference at the far end that kept glancing our way. At 8:50, Gerald Ashe himself crossed the hall, silver, pressed, the handshake that built half the county, and asked, through his lead counsel. For 5 minutes in the attorney's conference room, Dom looked at Tess. Tess looked at the door and picked up the box of exhibits herself. 5 minutes, she said. He can watch me unpack. He spent the first one the way I knew he would. On the mask, hands open, voice lowered into the grandfather register, the whole weathered patriarch instrument, Tess. This got away from all of us. Lawyers escalate. That's their nature, but you know Barbara and I only ever wanted a relationship with that boy. Daniel would have wanted, don't, Tess said, not loudly, and something in the one syllable made the 4 lawyers find their legal pads fascinating. You get to say his name at the end, if you still want to. She dealt the exhibits onto the table one at a time, naming each card, and I have never heard a room get quiet the way that room got quiet. My son's bird log. 9 entries on your investigator. Starting 5 weeks before you filed, you surveilled a 7-year-old, and he out-documented you. Snap, the fax your paralegal sent my hospital pretending to be a mortgage lender, 2 months before any judge saw one word, my employer's compliance file, sealed and certified. You reached into my workplace under a false name, Gerald. There's a statute. Dom highlighted it. Snap, the $25,000 no-contact agreement your man handed a school teacher in a parking lot, in writing, during litigation. Snap, the trust, the petition page 4, person and estate, the trade weekly. Your vote on the 30th decided, in the reporter's words, by a narrow margin of shares. Snap, camera footage of the emergency, my son, calm in his fort, following his own safety plan, while your gray sedan idles past his day camp 17 minutes before he ran from it. Your emergency, Gerald, your car. Snap. And then she set down the last folder, still in its waterproof wallet, block capitals up, and turned it so he could read his own son's handwriting. And Gerald Ash's face, I watched it happen, aged 10 years in 4 seconds. Riverbend, Tess said quietly. The lab originals. The county copies. The signature that isn't Daniel's, over the title he resigned rather than dishonor. My husband walked away from 30% of everything you built sooner than sign your lie, and you spent 19 months after his death trying to take his son to keep it buried. So let's be precise, in front of your 4 lawyers, about what this case has ever been. She squared the stack. You're not in court for Oscar, you're in court for 30%. His lead counsel had gone the color of the marble. Gerald tried the last register men like him have. The low one. The intimate one. Daniel was weak, he said. He could have had everything. Daniel was the load-bearing one, Tess said. That's why it's all coming down now. They folded in the hallway. Withdrawal of all petitions and motions with prejudice, Dom stood over the stipulation like a proctor, plus a consented order appointing an independent bank trustee for Oscar's shares. No Ash within a country mile of the votes. The Riverbend file went under seal to the court, and, per the new trustee's fiduciary duty, to the company's outside counsel by certified mail Monday morning. Miss Adeyemi's report, filed and moot, praised, I'm quoting, a demonstrably safe, structured, and loving home, including a rebuilt perimeter fence and an unusually well-documented backyard. The vote on the 30th went through without Oscar's shares in anyone's pocket. Ash Materials sold. The due diligence did exactly what due diligence does. By spring, the Trade Weekly ran 4 paragraphs about a voluntary remediation program for certain 2016-era municipal structures, and a one-line note that Gerald Ash had retired from all board positions, effective immediately, too. The classics never die. Spend more time with family. On the courthouse steps that Friday, while the adults shook hands and breathed, Oscar tugged my sleeve and pointed, rigid with ceremony, at the railing 10 feet away, where a small, impossible blue all-over bird sat looking back at us like it had an appointment. Indigo bunting, he whispered, already logging. That's a sign, Mom, statistically unlikely. Pencil scratch. But a sign. Here is what the end actually looked like, because endings are quieter than hearings. August went soft. The gray car never came back. Oscar kept a page open for it for 3 weeks. A hunter's courtesy, then formally closed the entry. Gray car. Departed. Presumed. Extinct. The first trust statement arrived from the bank addressed to the Oscar D. Ashy Trust, and Tess filed it, unread past the first line, in a drawer labeled in Oscar's printing. Boring, but important. Bibi Ashi wrote 1 letter in September. Real handwriting, no lawyers, no veranda. 3 sentences. The middle one an apology with no but in it, asking whether, someday, supervised, she might watch Oscar watch birds. Tess read it 4 times and put it in the drawer too. Someday, she said, is a real word. We'll see if she can conjugate it. And the fence? The fence we'd rebuilt in 4 days to hold off a courtroom got 1 more modification, in October, on my own initiative and my own dime. I cut a section out of the middle of it, between her yard and mine, and hung a gate there. Cedar, self-closing, Oscar height latch on both sides. I didn't announce it. I just built it, the way you say some things. She found me sanding the last of it at dusk. Sawdust in the air going gold, Oscar's light already on upstairs. She stood on her side of the new gate for a moment, hand on the top rail, testing it the way Miss Adeyemi had tested the fence. 1 hand, like a handshake. And then she came through it, and latched it behind her, and stood in front of me on my side of everything. Hey Eli, a beat. The whole street quiet. The whole sky going navy over the maple. Stop waiting. So I stopped. I kissed Tess Ryder at the gate I'd cut in the fence I'd built her. With sawdust on my hands and 19 months of careful patience finally, gratefully, obsolete, and from an upstairs window, distinctly, we heard a 7-year-old mutter finally, and the scratch of a pencil, because of course he logged it. I found out what he wrote in November when he granted me my annual Fort Audubon membership review. He'd added a page to the front of the logbook, the index page, the one that says who belongs to the yard. Mom, Oscar, Dad, with a small drawn star, seen in evidence, and at the bottom, newest entry, my name, and beside it, in the field where he marks every bird that matters, resident, not migratory. So now it's your turn. And I want the real answer, not the churchyard one. If the person on the other side of the fence was fighting a war you could see through the broken pickets, would you have picked up a hammer that Saturday or minded your business like the rest of the street? And here's the one I actually want in the comments. Who showed up for you when showing up cost them something? The neighbor, the teacher, the stranger who planted their feet when it would have been so easy to step away. Tell me what they did. I read every single comment. And somebody scrolling right now needs proof that people like yours exist. If this story got through your fence the way that kid with the binoculars got through mine, subscribe. Because next week's story starts with a knock at 2 in the morning and a suitcase that was not packed by the woman carrying it.